Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today, and thank you to those who are joining us online. This class is part of a monthly series in which we discuss how to apply fundamental Buddhist principles to our daily lives. Today we're going to talk about anger, the qualities of anger, how it harms us, how it undermines our compassionate work, and how we can use meditation to overcome anger. If you'd like to spend more time in this room after the class, praying or meditating or just exploring, you're absolutely welcome to. This room is open 24/7, and you're always welcome here. Before we begin, I'd like to just take a moment to set our compassionate intention. Let's remember that all beings have, at one time or another, been our kind mothers, and wishing that they all be happy and free of suffering, we are studying the Dharma so that we may benefit them and bring that wish to fruition. So I chose to talk about anger today because I've been noticing a lot of it in myself. I've been reading the news and getting very angry, and then I go online and I see that it seems like everyone else is angry too. And there's just so much to be angry about right now, isn't there? There's so much cruelty and injustice and divisiveness, and there's just so much happening to react to. It's just very, very easy to be angry. And I see this phrase batted around a lot. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And that's a pretty common belief, but is it true? Is it possible to pay attention to the sufferings of the world and not be outraged? Is it possible to act to stop that suffering and not do it out of anger or outrage? Is there another way that we can react? Sometimes we need to speak out against something that could have harmful consequences for a larger group of people or the whole country or the whole world. But we must always proceed with caution, because it's very easy for aggression or anger to slip in and spoil our compassionate intention. When it does, we often mistake anger for discernment or for a desire to better the world around us. We think we're just really fired up. And the reason for this is that anger gives the illusion of clarity. We feel strong when we have an opinion and we know where we stand. But the difference between the false clarity of anger and the true clarity of actually seeing clearly is that aggression has its own narrow logic, which ignores the larger karmic context of the situation. Anger doesn't consider the deeper levels of causes and conditions that surround each situation. It's only concerned with preserving the sense of self that it seems to be working for. And this aggressive logic fixates solely on the wrongness of the other. Everyone else is wrong. And we're going to tell them how it is that they're wrong. And we come up with all sorts of arguments to justify our anger. I'm right and you're wrong. You started it. I'm the real victim here. You know, we've got all these reasons why it's okay for us to be angry. When we feel threatened, anger seems like a reasonable response. Anger swoops in like a protective friend, ready to defend us with airtight logic and righteousness. But we're not able to act effectively when we're angry. We lose our reason, we act without dignity, we act like a little 2-year-old having a temper tantrum. And then once our anger subsides, we see that we've made this big mess out of nothing, and we feel emotionally shredded and exhausted. How is that going to help us help anyone? So most people, and I would wager most of us in this room, don't consider ourselves to be violent or angry people. Most of us condemn the violence that we see in the news or witness around us. But aggression or anger expresses itself in subtle ways too. We may not necessarily lash out when we're angry, but we may have a grudging or distrustful attitude toward others. Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche puts it as, we no longer keep them in the realm of our care. Have you ever noticed yourself doing this? I see some nods. I noticed myself do this week. I saw a headline about some poachers that entered a game preserve in Africa. They went to shoot some rhinos. And before they had the opportunity to draw their guns, some lions snuck up behind them and killed them. So my initial response to this was not compassion, because of course, my sense of self has this position that I'm anti-poaching and I love animals. And so when I saw that these poachers were killed, I was like, ha, that's funny, that's instant karma. But that's not a compassionate response. What would be better is to consider the fact that these poachers are at the whim of their afflictive emotions, and they have this urge to kill, which has not been resolved. They've just been interrupted temporarily. And, you know, that's awful that they were there to kill these animals. And these lions that killed them, now they have the karmic effect of killing as well. And so there's nothing to laugh about in this situation. It's all really very sad, and it deserves our compassion. But I noticed that I had removed the poachers from the realm of my care. So, Dzigar Kongtrul Rinpoche says, needless to say, when we expel others from the realm of our care, we ignore our Bodhisattva vow. When we take the Bodhisattva vow, does it say, may all beings find perfect happiness except all politicians and my ex? Do we leave out terrorists, dictators, big hairy spiders, and everyone that irritates us? When we put anyone on the other side of the fence, we lose our foundation for seeing clearly and acting for the welfare of self and others. So instead, what happens when we do this, when we expel others from our care, and we put them on the other side of the fence, is we begin to experience a lot of anxiety and fear. And if you look around at the people that display the most aggression and anger, you can see that they're the most paranoid of anyone. Fear and paranoia come with aggression because when we've made a separation between ourselves and others, we have in effect created enemies. And this in itself is a form of violence. According to His Holiness Penor Rinpoche, anger is the most harmful of the 5 afflicting emotions. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche calls anger the mortal enemy of liberation. Because one moment of anger, just one moment, will destroy aeons of accumulated virtue. In fact, the main cause of birth in the hell realm is anger. And many people think about that the teachings about hell are just a scare tactic. A lot of people just want to just acknowledge this material world that we can see right in front of us, and they think hell doesn't exist. And it's true, if you dig deep into the earth, you will never find a place called hell. But for the beings trapped in hell, their experience is very, very real. Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche says, anger is like a transparency on an overhead projector. Overlaid on the mind and magnified, it will eventually project the reality of hell. The reality we call hell arises infallibly as a projection of the mind, a terrifying nightmare, the reflection of our anger and hatred that multiplies like an image in a house of mirrors. But not understanding this, we practice anger all the time. Have you ever touched a snail before? Or a slug? It retracts. As soon as you touch it, it coils up and it pulls back. And that's how our minds are. At the slightest touch, the slightest provocation, our mind coils up in anger. Even if our feelings are only slightly hurt, we'll have this extreme rage. When someone makes even the slightest remark or looks at us in a certain way, we immediately get angry. Or when we put on some clothes and we don't like the way they look on us, we might tear them off and throw them on the floor. And, or when we pour tea in our cup, if we spill some, we get furious. Even our friends, if they do the slightest thing to displease us, we get angry like that without even noticing it. When we do housework, like cleaning or cooking. We even get angry at inanimate objects when things don't work the way that we want. And we may not even notice that we're getting angry, that you slam that silverware drawer that always gets stuck, or you bang the dishes in the sink. You get angry at things. So when someone gets angry, it affects the whole environment. It's like an unpleasant odor that everyone has to smell. And it disturbs the minds of those who witness it, but more than anything else, it disturbs the mind of the person who is angry. There is no peace for a person whose mind is filled with anger and hatred. No one enjoys the company of an angry person either. Others stay away from us as if we were a dangerous snake. There's nothing inherently frightening about the appearance of snakes, but because they have a tendency to be aggressive, the mere sight of them inspires fear in our minds, because we know they have a tendency to be aggressive. And even if we're not angry in the moment, when we have a habit of being angry, we will see others have that same reaction to us and avoid us. When we are angry, everyone becomes our enemy. The entire world seems hostile, and it's full of obnoxious people that are just out to irk us. We don't have any friends because everyone appears to be an enemy. We can't find any kindness or gentleness or hope when we're angry. And the reflection we see in the mirror is difficult to look at because we make a horrible, angry face, and we don't even want to look at ourselves because we look so ugly wearing that face. But we can't blame the mirror for our ugly face. We have to learn how to make a different face. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche says, once you overcome the hatred within your own mind, you will discover that in the world outside, there is no longer any such thing as even a single enemy. But if you keep giving free rein to your feelings of hatred and try to overcome your outer adversaries, you will find that however many of them you manage to defeat, there will always be more to take their place. Even if you could subjugate all the beings in the universe, your anger would only grow stronger. So anger can never be dealt with by indulging it. We often think we should vent our anger, but this will never help to solve the problem. Though we may think that all these people out there are enemies, the true enemy is hatred itself, and we cannot allow it to exist. The way to overcome hatred is to meditate one pointedly on love and patience. And once love and compassion take root in your being, there will never be any outer adversaries. It says in the 100 Verses of Advice, if you kill out of anger, your enemies will be never ending. But if you kill anger, that will kill your enemies once and for all. In one of his past lives, the Buddha took birth as a giant ocean turtle. And one day when he was far from land, he saw a sinking ship, and the passengers were about to drown. So he swam over and he rescued them by carrying them to shore on his back. And once he got to shore, he was so exhausted after carrying them this long way that he fell asleep on the beach. And while he slept, 80,000 flies began to eat their way into the turtle's body. The turtle awoke in agonizing pain, and he realized what had happened. But he saw that there was no way to be rid of the flies. He knew that if he plunged into the sea, all of them would die. And so, because he was a Bodhisattva, he stayed where he was, and he allowed the flies to devour his body. The turtle's heart was filled with love for these flies, even though they were consuming him. And he prayed, whenever I attain enlightenment, may I in turn consume all these insects' negative emotions and actions and their belief in true existence, and thus lead them to Buddhahood. So as a result of this prayer, when the Buddha turned the wheel of Dharma for the first time in Varanasi, those flesh-eating flies were present. They had been reborn as the assembly of 80,000 fortunate celestial beings. If the turtle had killed the insects by diving into the water, that never would have happened, and there would have been no end to his suffering. According to Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, the result of killing even a single being out of anger is to be reborn in the hell realms for the duration of 500 human lives. So if he had killed those 80,000 flies, there would be no end to his torment. But because of the way he was able to respond with compassion, 80,000 beings were there, reborn in the celestial realms, there when he first turned the wheel of Dharma. So Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche says that if you want to be a genuine follower of the Buddha, you should never retaliate when you are harmed. Instead, we should remember the 4 principles of positive training. 1, if someone abuses you, do not abuse him in return. If someone gets angry with you, do not get angry with him in return. If someone exposes your hidden faults, do not expose their faults in return. And if someone strikes you, do not strike them back. So we may think that by responding in kind, we will discourage someone from harming us again. But responding to anger with anger only escalates the situation. You can't put out a fire by adding more firewood to it. Once we realize that anger creates negative karma, which causes suffering, we will develop an aversion to it and will avoid adding wood to that fire. When we argue, each of us thinks that we're right, and 2 mental poisons are involved: an attachment to our own position and an aversion to the other person's position. And both of these arise from the ignorance of the fact that arguing doesn't do any good. Not only will our anger cause us suffering both now and in the future, but if we lash out in anger and inspire anger in others, then not only are we going to suffer anger and its effects, but now we've caused this other person, we've inspired anger in this other person, and they also will suffer from anger and its effects. So all we will have done is contribute to their suffering in our own. And that's not the Bodhisattva vow. We're trying to help beings not suffer anymore, not contribute to their suffering. So once we learn that the only result of anger is suffering, we will avoid anger at all costs. When the Chinese communists came to Tibet, many Buddhist teachers were abused and treated as criminals and beaten. But instead of feeling hatred, they prayed that the negative actions of all beings would be purified by the vindictive acts against them. One such teacher was a great Lama named Tulku. Tulku went into retreat when he was only 11 years old, and he stayed there until he was about 25. He had extraordinary meditative accomplishment, and people came from long distances to receive his blessings. In 1959, when the Chinese were imprisoning lamas and searching for members of the Tibetan resistance, they found Tulku in his retreat in a cave in the mountains. They bound his hands and tied him behind a horse and led him to jail. But at this point, he was elderly and very thin, and he was unable to keep up. Whenever he fell down, he was dragged. So in a village along the way, the people immediately recognized him. And even though it was very dangerous to show devotion to a Lama, they ran to him and they wanted to tend his wounds. And they were crying and bitterly criticizing the Chinese. But when they tried to help him, he said, "Please don't worry about me. Help the soldier who is holding this rope. He has blistered his hands dragging me." Can you imagine that kind of compassion? Say, "Don't help me. Help this soldier who was dragging me down the road." So on the first day of his imprisonment, the guards were vicious. But he met their cruelty with such gentleness that by the next day, they were a little bit kinder. Just by being near him, his captors were transformed. And the other prisoners were too. Everyone started treating each other with more kindness. And eventually, this prison that was once known for its brutality became the exception to the rule. Tulku Arik was moved from prison to prison, and everywhere he went, the guards and prisoners were moved to compassion. And everywhere he went, they would treat each other more gently, more kindly, inspired by his example. So this is the kind of influence that we can have on others if we develop a pure heart and pure motivation. The truth is that we can rarely force others to act as we think they should. We can't stop them from doing things we don't like. So we need to realize that our habitual approach to challenges, which is to change everything and everyone else, is ineffective. It fails to address the root of the problem, which is the negativity within our own mind. Trying to change the world without changing your mind is like seeing your dirty face in the mirror and trying to clean it by scrubbing the glass. So no matter how hard you scrub the mirror, the reflection is never going to change. The only way that you can alter that image is by washing your own face. Similarly, if we want to help create conditions that foster peace and well-being in the world, we first need to reflect these qualities ourselves. So right now, we face a myriad of thorny issues with unlimited potential for dissent and violence and bloody conflict. If you imagine the world as a field filled with rocks and sharp thorns, you might try to protect your feet by covering the whole world with leather. But that would be very impractical, and it would be much easier to just put leather on the soles of your own feet, right? We wear shoes. In the same way, even if the whole world is full of enemies, they can do you no harm as long as you keep loving kindness and compassion in your mind. The harm of allowing anger to arise in your mind is far greater than any harm an outside adversary can do to you. But as long as you engage with loving kindness and patience, then whatever harm they might cause to you will only act to help you on the path to enlightenment. So we know our habit is to respond with anger and blame. How do we reverse that and respond instead with compassion? We can't rely on mere intellectual understanding alone. That won't bring the profound inner peace that inspires others. We can't just will ourselves to be free of anger either. That would be like an alcoholic who claims that they can just stop drinking anytime they want. We have to rely on spiritual methods. Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche says, "For the spiritual power of peace to touch every person on this earth, it must radiate out from a profound peace within our own mind, across political and religious barriers, across the barriers of ego and self-righteousness. To this end, we should seek an inner peace so pure and stable that we cannot be moved to anger by violence, or to selfish attachment and fear by those who view or confront us with contempt and hatred. The only way to achieve such stability is by purifying our minds of the 5 poisons: ignorance, anger, attachment, jealousy, and pride. In truth, war and suffering are nothing but the outer reflections of these 5 poisons within our own minds. Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche says, "The essential difference between true peacemakers and those who wage war of any sort is the presence of extraordinary patience and discipline in the minds of the peacemakers as they work with these pervasive poisons. If we truly understand this, we will never allow ourselves to be defeated from within or without." In Tibetan Buddhism, the peacock is a symbol of the Bodhisattva. The peacock is said to eat poisonous plants, but instead of being poisoned, it transforms the toxins into the radiant colors of its feathers. In the same way, we who advocate peace must not poison ourselves with anger. Instead, we should regard those who perpetrate violence with equanimity, remaining constantly aware of our own state of mind. Then, as Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche explains, from the clear space of our own inner peace, our compassion can expand to include all those caught in the tragic web of rage, aggressors and victims alike. True compassion is aroused by suffering of any sort, the suffering of every being. It is not tied to right or wrong, attachment or aversion. Although we may aspire to help those that are suffering, we're often hampered by our own negative mental habits that perpetuate suffering and conflict rather than create peace and harmony. So let's imagine that we see a dog that has been abused. We sympathize with the dog's pain and we wish to help her, but our intention to help her will be compromised if we feel anger toward the person that hurt her, or if we desire to gain or achieve something through our actions. Maybe we want someone to see our kind deed and see that we're a good person. If in our efforts to help we become judgmental and self-righteous, or if we try to control or retaliate against someone out of anger, then our loving intention will be tainted by pride and aversion. It doesn't matter how compassionate our actions appear to others. If our actions spring from the 5 poisons, they will have a poisonous result. If our actions spring from wholesome compassion and virtue, then they will bring benefit and peace. If our actions spring from a mix of positive and negative intention, then they will produce a mixed result of benefit and suffering. So in order to ensure that our actions are truly helpful, we must try to reduce our negativity and learn to develop equal love and compassion for all beings. This means that we must try to help both the victim and the aggressor. We can't pick sides. In the case of a murder that's about to take place, our impulse is to protect the victim. But we should also act out of compassion for the assailant, to try to protect him from the consequences of killing. If he follows his murderous impulse, he will soon be estranged from everyone he knows or loves. His whole life will be wrecked. His chances for happiness will be ruined. So we can think to ourselves, wow, this guy is only thinking of the short term, and he has no idea what's in store for him. He has no idea that his actions will bring a degree of suffering that we wouldn't wish on anyone. And as difficult as it seems, we must cultivate the same compassion for the murderer as we would his victim. One is suffering now, but the other will suffer in the future. We must remember that true compassion is aroused by the suffering of every being. Similarly, we all wish to protect those ravaged by war. But those who wage war will eventually experience the negative consequences of their actions, and they will suffer even more than their victims did. Because the aggressors display power and arrogance and they inflict so much suffering on others, we find them distasteful, and it may be difficult to feel compassion for them. Nonetheless, we must hold war makers and their victims in the same compassionate embrace. Whether we are acting in the name of peace or war, aversion and attachment are toxic, and they will corrupt our compassionate actions. So how do we begin to work with our anger? We begin by examining our mind at all times and being aware of what occurs in it. We have a very strong habit of criticizing others. We are exceptional at pointing out others' faults, but we have a very hard time being aware of our own flaws. Examining the faults of others will not benefit anyone. It only leads to more disturbing emotions in ourselves, which block our path to liberation. So it's not your business to find other people's flaws. And even if you do point them out, there's no way for you to correct them. That's on them. That's their work. Your work is to watch your own mind and train in subduing and reducing your own disturbing emotions. It's like taking a test in school. You have to keep your eyes on your own paper. You don't have to look at anyone else's test. Keep your eyes on your own paper. We become aware of our own faults by analyzing our minds, constantly watching our thoughts, and recognizing whether they are positive or negative. And through this process, we will eventually be able to tame our minds. As you watch your mind, you may notice that you have more anger than you expected. Where does all this anger come from? Jetsunma says, since time out of mind, we have believed in self-nature as being inherently real. Since that first idea of self-nature as being inherently real, we have spent every moment from that point on securing ourselves, establishing ourselves, making ourselves safe, and defining, most of all, defining ourselves. In order to define myself, I have to see you as separate. She says that reactivity is a perception about self-nature being real, the perception of other, and the reaction is based on hope, fear, or neutrality. It's important to know that neutrality is not wisdom. Neutrality comes after you go through hope and fear, and then you see they're about balanced, so you're neutral. It's not the same as wisdom. In our daily lives, we don't have a single moment when we're not reinforcing the idea that self-nature is inherently real. We are locked in reactivity, like a rubber ball that's been thrown forcefully against a wall, and we're just bouncing off everything without any space between our experience and our reaction to it. So we start by watching this reactivity. No matter what activities you may engage in, whether you're sitting, walking, talking, eating, sleeping, we should constantly watch our thoughts. Just watch your reaction. We always have to keep an eye on our mind, and then whenever any of the 5 poisons arise, we should immediately apply the antidote right then and there. If we don't do it right then, that emotion will grow and become an obstacle. So it's important to just nip it in the bud. To apply the antidote, you can't just consciously decide not to react. Right? You can't just pretend you're not reacting. Like, I am so peaceful right now, I'm not reacting to anything. Like, that's not going to help anyone. So what you want to do is try to get a little bit of space somewhere in the equation. Just try to take a breath. Just give it a moment. Jetsunma says, the way to do that is to begin to recognize the nature of the phenomena that you are experiencing. She says, just stepping back to observe phenomena without going crashing into it headlong in total ignorance and drunkenness and denial is an incredible practice. To be an observer just for a moment, to watch the equation, self-nature is inherently real, therefore, to watch the reactiveness, to watch the play that goes on there, begins to create some space in the mind. So to practice like this, you want to start when your mind is relatively quiet. And Jetsunma suggests watching yourself look at a tree. You might notice how the tree is only relevant to you if it makes you feel good. Otherwise, what do you care about trees? When you walk through the forest, do you notice every single tree with perfect equanimity? No. You notice the ones that make you happy, or the ones that are ugly and you don't like them. But the only thing that makes a tree relevant to you is how it affects you and how it makes you feel. So watch what happens in your mind as you watch the tree. Maybe you like the way the sun sparkles in the dew on the leaves, and you hope that experience will stay. And then maybe a cloud comes through, and you fear that it will dim the sparkle that you're enjoying. And at first your reaction may be too fast for you to notice, but with persistence you will start to develop a little bit of space between your observation of phenomena and your reaction to it. And you'll start seeing that every phenomena that you observe creates this reaction of hope, fear, or neutrality. After you watch your mind like this for a bit, you want to just allow your mind to relax in its natural state without trying to make it do anything in particular. And then you can try watching your mind while you imagine an emotionally charged interaction. Try to imagine different scenarios in which you lose your temper. Maybe a cop pulls you over to give you a speeding ticket, or your child is crying incessantly, or someone insults you. Try to imagine something that really irks you, and notice the ways in which you judge the other person's words or conduct. Do your thoughts, feelings, words, and actions stem from self-centeredness? Do you place your own needs and desires first? Keep reconnecting with your compassionate motivation and watch your mind as if looking into a mirror. And just watch it and see if there's any desire, aversion, pride, jealousy, or ignorance present. Just see what bubbles up. And after you watch your mind like this for a bit, you can let your mind relax. It's important to let your mind relax after you do meditative exercises like this. Next, you can try watching your mind during an actual conversation, beginning with situations that don't elicit strong emotions. When it elicits strong emotions, your action will be very fast. So it's easier to start watching this process in situations that are not quite as provoking. Over time, as you practice, this will help you to lengthen your fuse. As you become aware of how you respond to negative situations, you will learn to pull back from confrontation instead of jumping in head first. You'll learn to pause before you react. Then when your annoying coworker says something that really irks you, you'll say, aha, there it is. There's that anger I've been working with. That small gap of space of stepping back and seeing our anger gives us the opportunity to respond in a different way. You have to be persistent. We've been practicing anger since time out of mind, so an hour or two of contemplating this is not going to cut it. Our angry minds are like a sheet of paper that we've rolled up very, very tightly and bound with a rubber band, and it's just been like that for years and years and years, rolled up tight. So if we take the rubber band off and we try and lay that paper flat, it's going to lay flat for maybe half a second before it rolls right back up. You know, you have to keep pressing it flat. You might have to hold it open or lay some textbooks down on top of it, or maybe roll it the opposite way in order to make it stay flat. So it takes a lot of practice to undo our habits. When you do get angry, and you will, don't be upset with yourself. Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche says, use the anger as a springboard for contemplating equanimity and giving rise to loving kindness and compassion. Each time you do this, your fuse will lengthen. Your patience will increase. At first, you might become totally lost in rage. It will come like a flash of lightning. But over time, by reminding yourself of the consequences, you can learn not to indulge every angry impulse. With practice, you will establish new habits that will help you when your buttons are pushed. So when you are overcome by anger, this is an opportunity to practice also. So when you're overcome by anger, examine it. Where does it come from? Where does it go? What is it? Does it have a shape, a color, a form? What is its essence? What is anger really when we don't react to it? You might be surprised to find that anger is not as substantial as you thought. Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche says, the true nature of anger can't be grasped. Anger is empty, yet it manifests. Mind has a mirror-like quality. Many reflections can arise in a mirror, yet they have no substance. There is nothing to grasp, nothing to push away. There is ultimately nothing to accept or reject. When we recognize its empty essence, anger is liberated into the mirror-like clarity of mind. So now I'd like to try a technique. We'll try meditation to stabilize our minds. This is called Schemata Meditation. And it's a simple meditation that you can try anytime. All we're going to do is watch our breath. And this is a good meditation to do if you want to try the other meditative practices that we discussed for dealing with anger. This is a good one to start with when you start your meditation practice, to start by giving some space to your mind so you have the opportunity to see when anger arises. This meditation helps to calm our reactivity and create space. Of course, your ego doesn't want you to meditate, so it's going to try to do everything it can to distract you. And the way to handle this is to just disengage from your thoughts. Don't try to suppress your thoughts, just let them be. Your meditation is not lost by hearing your thoughts, but by following them down the road. So when you find yourself following a thought, just drop it. Drop it like a hot potato. You don't have to look at it. You don't have to wonder whether it's a good thought or a bad thought. It doesn't matter. Just drop the thought and return to your breath. So you can sit comfortably with your back straight and place your hands in your lap, just gently relaxed. And in our tradition, we meditate with the eyes just slightly open. You can aim your eyes, if you go like this is a good way to find a good point of focus. You can look at your pinky, just right down there. So watching the breath creates mental stability, but it's very relaxing, so try not to fall asleep. If you find yourself getting sleepy, remember your intention. We are doing this to benefit all beings. And when we're self-absorbed, when we get a little too cozy and we think we might take a nap. So if you're really sleepy, you can raise your gaze a little bit. And if you're too wound up, you can lower your gaze a little more. Just going to set a timer. Okay. So allow yourself to relax completely and breathe normally. Put a very light attention on your breathing. Don't try to control it at all. Just breathe naturally. And put the most gossamer thin attention on your breath. It's like taking your pulse. You don't put any pressure on it, just observe it. Your attention should be like a feather, gently riding on the surface of your breath. So we'll meditate for about 5 minutes. So every time that we listen to a teaching or meditate or do any kind of virtuous activity, we always want to dedicate the merit afterwards. His Holiness Penor Rinpoche says that unless our merit is sealed with dedication prayers, whatever merit you have accumulated for countless aeons may be instantly destroyed by your giving in to a moment of anger. So it's very important that we always dedicate our prayers after every virtuous activity. So we're going to do that now. There's a handout, which I managed to forget to hand to myself. Can anyone possibly pass me a copy? Thank you, Kampo. So this is a wonderful prayer here. This is an excerpt from The Gateway to the Ocean of Bodhichitta, which is a much longer prayer than what's written here. This is the first portion of it. So I'd like for all of us to read this prayer aloud, and then we'll read Jetsunma's dedication that's at the bottom of the page. By the truth of the ultimate mind of enlightenment, generated by mighty and sublime Avalokiteshvara, and all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, may Supreme Bodhichitta be born in myself and in all beings under the sky. May the cause of suffering, the anger of all beings, and its result, the heat and cold of the hells, come to me, dissolve into me. I give to all beings under the sky all the merit of my loving kindness and my freedom from anger. Thus may anger's realms, the hells, be emptied. May all hell beings become Avalokiteshvara of the Vajra family and realize sublime mirror-like wisdom. By this effort, may all sentient beings be free of suffering. May their minds be filled with the nectar of virtue. In this way, may all causes resulting in suffering be extinguished, and only the light of compassion shine throughout all realms. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.